Okay, well, it's a rock. Probably, possibly an agate. I don't know. Well, heck, can I cut a landscaping rock and turn it into a pretty gemstone? Well, I'm pretty sure I can facet it, but what it will look like, I don't have any idea. It is not transparent like a facetable gemstone should be. It's kind of translucent or opaque. I suspect that after I cut this, not a lot of light is going to go into the crown or upper half of the gemstone, be reflected back by the facets in the pavilion or lower half of the gemstone, and back into the viewer eyes in a flash of brilliance. It's just not going to happen with this rock. Well, if Opie wants it, I guess I'll give it a try. Now, what design to use? I guess I need to look through some of the binders and files of all the designs that I've collected over the years and see if anything catches my eye. Okay, I suspect this landscaping rock is a agate, possibly. So agate has a hardness of about 7.5 on the Mohs scale, about the same as quartz. So I'm gonna have to use my lap to grind a flat spot so I can attach it to my dop. So I'm gonna go ahead and use a 240 grit lap. If it was a softer stone, I'd probably use a 600, but this stone should stand up. So I'll see what I can do to grind a flat spot with my 240 grit topper. We get my water drip going, get a good hold on the stone, and just want to grind a flat spot so that I can attach the dop. Let's see how that's doing. Okay, so I may grind it a little bit more, but we've got a flat spot now we can attach to our brass dop. Then we can start cutting this landscaping rock. Okay, for my transfer jig, I've put a piece of modeling clay onto the bottom dop, and that kind of will mold itself to the bottom side of our stone, which is not flat, and help us get the top side of the stone, which is flat, lined up with the dop that we're going to attach it to. So this is not the dop I'm going to use on the top, but what I do is I get a larger than I need dop, about as large as the stone, and that way I can center the stone pretty easily with this oversized dop. So I get it about where I want it, and push the stone into the modeling clay, kind of, move the modeling clay up. And that kind of will not hold it in place, but temporarily, just snug up to it, so it'll kind of keep the stone in place a little bit as I switch out my dops. So now I'll remove this oversized dop and insert the actual dop that I'm going to use, this dop. So I insert that into my transfer jig. And now this dop is already centered on where I think I want the stone centered at. So now I just prepare the two-part epoxy and attach that to the stone. Okay, as I've mentioned before, I'm currently using DevCon two-part epoxy. I used JB Weld for several years and it worked great, but I'm going to test out this DevCon this year, and it seems to be working super good. So the way you use the two-part epoxy is I use a business card and just make a puddle, 2 puddles. Just eyeball them until they're about the same size. You want about a 50-50, you want a 50-50 mix, but close enough is fine. So get about 2 puddles about the same, It looks like I put a little bit more than 50-50, so I simply, scrape out a little bit, no big deal. Close enough is fine. Don't worry about any air bubbles in the epoxy. Then you mix it together. I use a bamboo skewer that I got from the supermarket. Anything will work. And then you just put the epoxy, I put it under the dop and then around the dop so that it goes a little ways up the dop and onto the stone. Then I push the dop onto the stone and use gravity to turn the dop over a few times and let the epoxy settle. You don't want it to run down the dop, and you don't want it to run over the side of the stone. And then I let it set overnight, and we're ready to cut the stone tomorrow. So, time to pick a design. Here we go. Angel Cross. A cool design that Jeff Graham made back in 2002. I think this will work. And because the stone is not transparent, I only have to cut the crown or upper half of the stone. And I should be able to just kind of freestyle the pavilion or lower half of the gemstone with no problems. I don't have to follow Jeff's instructions for the pavilion. Jeff gave this design to the gem cutting community as a Christmas present back in 2002 for any cutter to freely use. I made a video showing how to access Jeff's old website that is gone now and how to download the 24 or so designs that Jeff put into the public domain. So just take a look at this video if you want to see all of the free designs by Jeff. There are also many other designs that Jeff published in his numerous gem cutting books that you can cut, but you do have to buy the book to get those designs. Because this design involves frosting some facets to get the cross to stand out, there are a number of options available on which facets to frost and which ones to polish. And I'll need to pick one of the styles of the options for this design. And again, there's many options on the stone as far as what to frost, what to polish. Do I frost the cross and polish the rest of the stone like in this example? Or do I frost the cross except for the table and polish it and the rest of the stone like this example? Or do I frost just parts of the cross to make a shadow or maybe a 3D effect? Or do I polish the cross and frost the stone? Do I frost the cross with a finer frosting on parts of the cross and polish the rest of the stone and the table? Or do I polish the cross, make a fine frost on part of the cross, and frost the rest of the stone, like in this example? Yes, this is the design that I think I will use. Okay, for our angel cross design, we want to orient the stone. We want to put our index tooth at 96 as the index tooth, and you orient the stone so the bottom part of the cross will be at the 96. So this is how we want to orient this stone. So we'll lock the stone into the dop and we'll be ready to start cutting our landscaping rock. Okay, we're going to deviate from the instructions since we're not fastening a transparent stone, we're fastening more of a rock. So we're going to skip the pavilion and we're going to cut the crown, which is where the cross is. But we do need to set the girdle. So we'll start with the pavilion instruction 8 and we will do the girdles, P8 through P13. So we set our angle at 90 degrees, set the index tooth at 96, and we're going to use this to set the bottom part of our cross. So
we'll work through setting the girdle. Okay, so I'm using the instructions for the angel cross, but only as a kind of a guide. So I'm working on the girdle, and so the top flat part is P13 of the instructions. So I flattened that out, and then the next angle cuts here and then here, which will be the sides of the cross. So I made the top, for now, 7 millimeters wide, looked about right. Looks like that'll work for now. So then I cut the angles, the next two angles, so I could get the sides of the cross set up. So now I'll set those at, so now I'll cut those so they're 7 millimeters by cutting this angle, which is the P12 instruction. No, I think that's let me check. That's the P9 instruction, the 16 and 80. So I'll work on the 16 degree and the 16 tooth and the 80 tooth so that I get these flat sides at about 7 millimeters. And then I'll bring up the 96 tooth and cut the bottom part of the cross. So it's also 7 millimeters. Then everything should be lined up. I'll take a look. Maybe I'll adjust it after that. Again, we're just using the diagram here as a guide. We're not worried about the refractive index or how it's going to work, because this is a translucent stone, not transparent, and light's not going to bounce back the way it would if it was a very clean piece of quartz or some other gemstone. Okay, so I'm continuing to cut the 16 and 80 teeth of our index gear, and that's these two angles right here and then what I'm doing is I continue to cut, I will cut until this flat side piece, which is the sides of the cross, are equal to 7 millimeters in length, and that'll match them up to the top. They'll be the same size. So it'll continue to kind of grind in like this on this side and this side. Then after that, then I'll worry about going back to the 96 tooth and cut up until I have 7 millimeters for the bottom part of the cross. Then our outline should be set, and then it's just a matter of looking at if 7 millimeters was the right width, or it's 6.5, or maybe a little bigger, a little smaller. Just looking, and as I go to finer grits on the laps and making minor adjustments to the girdle till I get it the way it looks good, and then we'll start working on the upper half of the cross. Okay, I've got the outline girdle of the stone shaped. I went with 6.25 millimeters for the width of the cross. So it's now pretty well set, roughed in. It's just a kind of a pre-form. So now I can work on actually following some of the instructions on the diagram for cutting the crown or upper half of the stone. Okay, so once we set our girdle and the basic shape outline of our gemstone, there's a lot of, then I'm just cutting the crown. So there's a lot of instructions. There's 13 lines of instruction plus the table for cutting the crown. However, they're pretty straightforward. Of those 13 lines of instruction, the first 10 are just giving you the angle and the teeth to use in your index gear, and you cut to the girdle. So we cut our first line of instructions down to the girdle, and then the next line of instruction, you just go right to there on the girdle, and that's with the 80 tooth. Then we'll go to the 16 tooth and just keep walking around the stone tooth by tooth for these next 10 lines of instruction, and just bringing them down to the girdle. It's pretty straightforward. Okay, I just finished going over our landscaping stone with 600 grit topper. The black marks you see around the side, that's I was using my Sharpie to help me make sure I knew where one facet left off. So that's the reason for that. But I have not done any of the facets yet, numbers 7, C7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, or 13, or of course the table. I haven't touched those yet, which deal with the cross, because I was working with rougher laps. Now I'm switching to my 12M, and I'll go over these laps, these facets, and start working on the cross itself. And since everything else is already at a 600 grit facet, I may leave that as the rough frosting, the darker frosting. The design I'm going to use, there'll be a lighter frosting at each corner, and that I'll use the 12M, and then I'll polish the rest of them, the facets. Okay, I just finished going around the girdle with my 12M lap, and then I went ahead and used 3,000 diamond on a bat lap, and then 60,000 diamond on a bat lap, and polished the girdle. So I'm done with the girdle. So instructions P8 through P13 with the girdle I'm all done with. I won't, on the pavilion, I won't use the diagram instructions of P1 through P7, because I'm not going to make a center point on the bottom half of this stone. I'm probably going to use step cuts and just make a girdle, probably 0.5, 0.3 millimeter girdle. So if this stone, if anybody ever wants to mount it, they can do so. There'll be a girdle. And step cuts will be the easiest way to go with this on the bottom side. So I'll just pretty easily figure out the step cuts to use once we get to the pavilion. So now on the crown, like I said, I've already used the 600 grit topper. So I've got it, the whole thing frosted at the 600 grit. Now I'll go over instructions 7 through 13 with my 12M lap, and then I'll probably leave the 12M on the ends here, 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 and here as a finer frosting, and then the rest of the girdle I'll go ahead and, or the rest of the cross, I'll go ahead and use the 3,000 grit diamond on a bat lap and polish it with the 60,000 grit diamond on a bat lap, and then see how it looks. Okay, so there's our Angel's Cross, and what I did is I frosted the non-cross parts of the face of the stone with a 600 grit topper, and then the outer parts of the cross, the little triangles on each corner, I frosted with basically a 1500 grit diamond, which is a 12M, and then I decided to polish the table and the little points, little triangles up here. I think it looked better, so that's the stone. Now I will transfer it, and I'll probably cut step cuts on the bottom. So let me go ahead and transfer this. Okay, after transferring our landscaping rock to the other dot so we can work on the bottom half of the stone, we want to put it in the index gear lined up correctly. So the largest facets on the girdle are at 16 and 80. So you put your tooth at either 16 or 80, in this case it's at 80, and you line it up by making sure your facet just touches that calibrated piece of metal that's sitting on our flattest lap, which is our ceramic lap. So you can see as I move the armature up and down, you can see when the stone just touches the piece of metal all along the facet that it's lined up, and that's when you tighten down the set screw to lock your dop and your stone in place. And then of course check that you've got it set correctly by changing it to the 16 tooth, which is the other side, and you want it lined up just right. So it's sitting just right, and our stone is now ready to cut the bottom half or the pavilion of our landscaping rock. Okay, so I'm deviating from the instructions on this design for the pavilion. I'm just going to cut step cut. So I'm going to take the same index teeth that we used to cut the girdle, and I'm just going to put an angle. I put an angle of 55 degrees on my Ultratech, and I cut the first row, and now I'm going to cut, I'm going to take 5 more degrees away. I'm going to set my angle at 50 degrees and cut the next row with the same index teeth, and I'm just going to keep doing that to see, just use step cuts for the pavilion. I'm not sure how many rows I'm going to cut yet. Okay, so I've got the steps pretty well set where I like them, where I think they look good, so I'll just work through my pre-polishing laps and polish it up. I finished a 600 grit topper. Okay, finished polishing the bottom half, the pavilion of our landscaping rock, so I'll soak it in acetone and get the two-part epoxy off so we can take a look at the other side, the top part of the stone, and see what the finished stone looks like.
So, can a landscaping rock be faceted? Yes, of course it can be. The Angel Cross design works well with stones like this because you're just not going to get light to reflect back from the interior of this stone. So polishing across and frosting key facets to make the cross stand out make a good option. The Angel Cross design is not a difficult design to cut, and I would recommend new cutters give this design a go. After cutting a few stones first, especially if you're going to just freestyle cut the pavilion and maybe use step cuts like I did. As a new cutter, having cut a couple of stones first and understanding how step cuts work will really help you as you freestyle your pavilion. Also, I'd recommend cutting Angel Cross at least once in a more traditional gemstone. I think this design would look great in amethyst, citrine, topaz, or maybe even a garnet that is just too dark to do much else with. There's pretty much endless possibilities. So give this design a try and let me know how your gemstone turns out. And always, happy faceting, everyone.